Being a lady of the night in ancient Rome was not for the faint of heart or those who get easily offended. These women were some of the most successful entrepreneurs of their day, raking in more cash than most men. But they also had to contend with some pretty dangerous competition, both human and otherwise. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're answering the question, what did prostitutes do for fun in ancient Rome? The women who worked as prostitutes in ancient Rome were part of an important economic system that sustained many people, including themselves, pimps, madams, and procurers. People who want to make it big often turn to sex work, and there is no shortage of it in the ancient world. Prostitution was widespread throughout the Roman Empire, and women from all walks of life engaged in it. It was common for women to enter prostitution as a way to supplement their income, or to support themselves and their families during hard times. In fact, there are records of respectable matrons prostituting themselves to make money for their family. For example, the Emperor Augustus's mother, Aetia, is said to have prostituted herself to support her family during difficult financial times. And Livia, the wife of Augustus's great-nephew, Drusus, was rumored to have been a prostitute before she was married. So if the wives and mothers of noblemen could resort to this profession, then it must have been a financially sound choice. In ancient Rome, there were different types of prostitutes, but they were all united by their profession. There were women who prostituted themselves in taverns and brothels, as well as those who worked as high-end courtesans catering to the wealthy elite. Despite their differences, these women all faced unique challenges and dangers that came with their profession. One of the most significant risks that prostitutes faced in ancient Rome was violence at the hands of their clients. Prostitution was a highly regulated industry in ancient Rome, and there were severe punishments for those who broke the law. Women who engaged in prostitution outside of the law were likely to be arrested and punished severely. The punishment could include fines, imprisonment, or even exile from the city. They could also be physically abused by their clients, as there were no laws to protect them from mistreatment. Prostitutes were also vulnerable to sexual violence, as there was no penalty for rape in ancient Rome. In fact, a woman's virginity was considered to be the property of her father or husband, and he could take legal action against her if she had sex before marriage. This meant that a woman who had sex with a client was at risk of being assaulted without any legal recourse. Another danger that prostitutes faced in ancient Rome was the threat of disease. Sexually transmitted infections were common in ancient Rome, and there was no effective treatment for most of them. Prostitutes were particularly vulnerable to these diseases, as they were often working in unsanitary conditions and with multiple partners. The most common sexually transmitted infection in ancient Rome was syphilis, which could cause blindness, paralysis, and death. Other infections could lead to painful ulcers, rashes, and other symptoms that made it difficult to work as a prostitute. To combat the spread of disease, the Roman government required prostitutes to register and get regular checkups. However, these measures were not always effective, and many prostitutes continued to contract deadly diseases. Despite these dangers, prostitution was still a popular profession in ancient Rome. The women who worked as prostitutes were often drawn to the profession because it offered them a certain degree of freedom and independence. In a society where women were expected to be subservient to men, prostitution allowed women to have control over their own bodies and their own income. Additionally, prostitution was seen as a way to escape poverty and improve one's social status. For many women, the potential rewards of prostitution outweighed the risks, and they entered the profession willingly. Although there is little historical evidence to support this claim, legend has it that the first prostitute in Rome was a woman named Scaevola, who was so skilled in the art of seduction that she was able to attract the attention of the most powerful men in the city. Scaevola's story is said to have inspired other women to follow in her footsteps and become prostitutes. And so the profession began to grow in popularity in Rome. Rome was not just a center for political power, but also for trade and commerce, attracting people from all over the empire. This influx of people created a thriving market for prostitution, as there was always a new audience of men looking for the services of prostitutes. As the demand for prostitution grew in Rome, so did the competition among prostitutes. In order to attract clients, prostitutes had to differentiate themselves from one another. Some prostitutes developed a reputation for being experts in a particular type of sexual activity, such as fellatio or anal sex. Others cultivated a specific image or persona in order to attract their target market. For example, some prostitutes dressed in luxurious clothing or jewelry to appeal to wealthy clients. Still others marketed themselves as virgins in order to attract more conservative clients who were looking for a more innocent experience. This competition was not limited to the prostitutes themselves, as they were often backed by powerful gangs or individuals who controlled the brothels where they worked. These gangs or madams would often use violence and intimidation to protect their turf and ensure that their prostitutes were the ones getting the most clients. In addition to the competition among prostitutes, they also had to contend with the competition from brothels. Brothels were businesses that offered prostitution services and were often run by organized crime rings. The quality of the prostitutes working in these establishments varied, but they were typically more expensive than those working on the streets. Brothels also offered a more luxurious and private experience for clients, which made them more appealing. In order to stay afloat, street prostitutes had to offer a cheaper and more convenient alternative to the brothel experience. They often worked in groups and took clients as they came, regardless of their social status or appearance. Street prostitution was a risky profession, as prostitutes were often exposed to the elements and vulnerable to attack. In order to protect themselves, prostitutes sometimes worked in teams and looked out for each other. They also developed their own codes of conduct and ethics, such as refusing to work with pimps or procurers. Despite the risks and challenges involved in street prostitution, it remained a popular option for women seeking to earn money and support themselves in the ancient world. One of the biggest challenges for prostitutes in ancient Rome was standing out from the crowd. With so many women offering the same services, it was difficult for one prostitute to differentiate herself from another. This led to a situation where prostitutes had to resort to more extreme measures to attract clients, such as dressing in outrageous clothing or jewelry, or even painting their bodies in bright colors. Another challenge for prostitutes in ancient Rome was dealing with the competition. As we mentioned earlier, there were powerful gangs and individuals who controlled the brothels where prostitutes worked. These groups would often use violence and intimidation to protect their turf and ensure that their prostitutes were the ones getting the most clients. Prostitutes who tried to work independently or who didn't cooperate with the gangs were often beaten, harassed, or even killed. In addition to these challenges, prostitutes in ancient Rome also had to deal with the stigma associated with their profession. Prostitution was seen as a low and degrading profession, and prostitutes were often looked down upon by society. This made it difficult for them to find housing and other essential services. They were often forced to live in brothels or other crowded and unsanitary conditions. The lure of easy money, however, was too much for many women to resist, and prostitution continued to thrive in ancient Rome despite the many challenges involved. The women who chose to become prostitutes in ancient Rome were often doing so out of desperation or necessity. They may have been poor or come from broken homes, or they may have been sold into the profession by their families. Once a woman entered the world of prostitution, it was very difficult to escape. They were trapped in a cycle of poverty and exploitation that made it nearly impossible to make enough money to support themselves, let alone leave the profession. Ancient Rome was a complex and fascinating city, and the women who lived there were no exception. The prostitutes, in particular, were a unique group of women who played an important role in the city's economy, despite the many challenges they faced. These women were able to carve out a place for themselves in Roman society and make a decent living doing what they did best. Thank you for watching this episode of our channel. If you enjoyed it, please like and share it with your friends. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the topic. Do you know anything about prostitutes in ancient Rome? Let us know in the comments below. Also, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. We've got lots of interesting topics coming up that we think you'll love. See you next time.